as you go through most of your world, if your pattern never changes, you don't have any way to distinguish between what's the dream and what's awake. And so what ends up creating self-awareness for people, I think, and this has been historically true for me, is some kind of friction point, some kind of jarring shock or change.
Welcome to the Powerful One podcast, episode 34 with Aaron Velky. Aaron Velky is an entrepreneur, writer, high-performance coach, speaker, and author from Baltimore, Maryland. He's the CEO of Ortus Academy, a financial intelligence company that works to empower businesses with team building and financial wellness workshops, especially those in millennial and Gen Z teams. They've worked with over 2,500 individuals to support their financial future while supporting their increased production in the workspace. He's also the CEO of FrontRunner, a mastermind and retreat company that brings emotional, vulnerable, and transformational leadership training to inspire heart-led, purposeful business men and women. Aaron's coached several hundred athletes and released his first book in March called Let Her Play, written to help parents and coaches prepare their athletes for success in the future. And to balance it all out, he's an athlete, reader, adrenaline junkie, and comic book nerd. And in this episode with Aaron Velky, we talk about using pain and friction points in your life to move forward and grow. We talk about the fear of failure. We talk about some of Aaron's early failures and using those failures to propel him forward. We talk about the difficulty and the power of saying no, self-awareness, and how to master self-awareness. We talk about purpose. We talk about being intentional with your time and your priorities, turning what you love into your businesses as Aaron has done, what excites him the most about his current journey moving forward, and his life advice for everyone. So here it is, guys, episode 34 with Aaron Velky. All right, Powerful One podcast here with Aaron Velky. What's going on, brother?
What's up, dude?
Good to see you, man. Yeah, good to be with you, man. I appreciate you making the time.
This is going to be a blast.
It's going to be great, man. So let's see. We got connected, how long ago was that, man? We got through Ian, through FrontRunner. We just got finished our course this past October, and it was a life-changing moment in time for me, meeting you, meeting Ian, and just being connected with you guys now, man. It's just, life's good. I feel focused, and you've had, I tell everyone this, I've told you this, you have had a tremendous impact on my life. I've only known you now for like a month or so, and no, seriously, man, I mean that with all sincerity. So yeah, man.
I appreciate that, man.
Yeah.
It's always funny what those events bring.
Yeah.
We go in and we're really clear on what the intended outcome is. But we never really know, right? We never truly know what someone's going to extract or the way they're going to feel about the activities, the workmanship, the group, right? There's so many unknowns.
Yeah.
But it is really heartwarming to know that we've had an impact and that, like, you're evolving, man.
It's crazy, man. Like, and it's funny to think about. I remember calling Ian and like self-sabotage, like trying to talk myself out of it, almost out of the trip, and just saying like, man, I'm not broken. I don't need fixing, and I'm so glad, and like just that little sense of doubt, and I feel like that comes with maybe everything that I do. Is a little sense of doubt, and having Ian kind of talk me out of that was so nice, because I couldn't imagine where I'd be if I didn't go to that, and I wasn't a part of your guys, FrontRunner, everything like that. But it's just a crazy thing, to think about, that I was almost going to talk myself out of something that's had already such a tremendous impact on me, and really like is one of the catalysts for the growth mindset that I have now. And if that would have halted me, then that growth mindset would have never been able to really come to fruition, because I would have literally been being like, no, I don't need to grow. Like, that's not. And so just that whole idea, I don't even know if I ever told you that part, but I'm just so glad that I went and that I experienced that with you guys. Do you want to talk about a little bit what we did with FrontRunner? And obviously we'll rewind and get back to how it started and stuff like that, but kind of like what the retreat was, FrontRunner, stuff like that, and we can go from there.
Well, let's also weave in this like fear that hit you. I did know about it. It was like, we gotta get this kid in. Like, there's always, whenever we are just about to round the corner, we always get nervous. And if you can remember your first time driving, like right? Making subtle turns was huge. And whenever we've been coaching for long enough that whenever there's someone that's excited about the event and there's right before the event this like snap effect of this isn't right, we know it's just a response, not the right choice.
Yeah.
So we work really diligently to make sure that we're showing up then to just kind of wrap that person in some safety and security to take the next step, because those are the moments that you break through something.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So FrontRunner started a number of years ago now, probably 4. And all we were doing at the time was taking entrepreneurs through, goal setting and check-ins and maybe some emotional development. And over the course of it evolving, over the course of Ian and I now coming together on it and evolving from then, what we've realized is that most people want their business, especially entrepreneurs, want their business to change and grow. But they don't realize that they're their business.
Yeah.
And so they need to grow and change. And what we've begun doing and building is really a pathway for someone to evolve. And you can evolve in one of 2 ways. You can either change your mindset and build new structures, or you can let go of old structures, right? So it's either like add or delete.
Yeah.
And most of the time we are adding more information. We're not adding to our internal and to our whole figure. We're just consistently bombarding ourselves with like, I gotta do more, I gotta create more, I gotta do this. But until our identity shifts, it will never stick. I got a phone with a new author, and we were talking about how, there's not really a lot of money to be made in books unless you've got a really big platform and an audience that will just snap up, thousands of books.
Yeah.
But as someone entering the author game, the money is in, or the opportunity is in speaking and workshops and training, right? And we were talking about her doing speaking, and she was like, well, I'm nervous, like I'm not a speaker. She's like, maybe I just need practice. And this is a great example. If you're listening, like, this is a great example of how it starts, right? So we say, I am not. And whatever falls after that, you can never become. So we work really hard to help someone evolve their identity so that they can say, I am a speaker. And with practice, you become a better speaker. But if you are stuck behind, I'm not a speaker, every time you get on stage, you'll fall. Because your identity is incongruent with who you want to be.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah, that's always a fascinating thing to me, like the idea of identity. It seems like this like made up thing that we, like, why do we want to be so polarizing with like, this is our identity? Like it almost seems like this made up kind of thing, like to kind of force people into this box. If I tell you I'm a martial arts coach, you'll have these certain things where you're like, oh, okay, I know this about it. It's like you're forming my identity. So like about that identity stuff, like what, and this is one of the many things we'll get into, but like what about the identity is something that like you're passionate about, whether it's breaking the identity, finding an identity, just the whole idea of identity in general?
I've found it fascinating because through different periods of my life, I can point to moments and inflection points where it had to shift.
Yeah.
So I had 2 pretty major accidents that were, for what it could have been, near-death experiences, right? And after that, it shifted my identity in that I was now awake to the fact that it could have gone very different and I had a 3rd chance.
Yeah.
When those kind of moments happen, and it doesn't have to be nearly as intense as that, but it could be you're fired from your job, right? This happens to people all the time. They're like, but I'm a banker. Well, now you're not a banker.
Right.
So who do you want to become? And when you unravel the way your identity is formed, it's usually by very, very outside factors. So your job, your style, your haircut, your height, like these things that don't really have anything to do with your identity, right? If you ask someone to like describe you, they might describe you as like, well, he's a wrestler and he's a trainer and he's a coach, and like all of those things are just representations of what you may be doing, not who you are. And we are in complete control of who we are, but we have to separate ourselves from what we're doing. So these inflection points for me were great opportunities to create some distance, look at what I was doing and see if it was really me.
Right.
And most of the time, it wasn't.
Yeah, man, that's a huge thing. I always say, like, and this goes along with like a lot of the stuff that you like teach, but it's like the idea of purpose, like as who you are. And I have the shirt on, but it's the you are is capitalized and it says purpose. And when I think about like purpose, it's like if your purpose can be taken away from you, so if it's like a title or a job or something like that, then it's not your purpose. So that's a little bit of the way that I tie into the way I think about purpose that you do, but also it goes into identity as well.
Yeah, I love thinking of purpose as the umbrella, and you can choose a different stem to that umbrella any day.
Yeah.
Right? If you imagine someone saying like, well, my purpose is to bring banking, back to the banker analogy, like to bring banking clients value, and they're no longer a banker, like they retired, they're gonna crumble,
right?
Because they no longer have a purpose. And you see this a lot with people that do retire, that their job has been their entire reason for existing, and they both mentally and physically collapse under this new sort of space, right? That has no intention. And if you're listening and purpose is something that you are thinking about, or it's something that you're intentional about crafting, the hardest thing to do is to build a uniform purpose that doesn't revolve around your job title or your business. If every business I have collapsed, my purpose wouldn't change.
Right.
It would just evolve into the next version of how that purpose gets lived, right?
Yeah.
And you know, the inflection points can be a choice, right? You can make a choice to choose a new identity. You can make a choice to let go of how you were.
Yeah.
It just, we have to be mindful of, is this an inflection point? And if not, would I like it to be one?
Right. What I'm curious about is like people see where you are now, and maybe my listeners or just people in general, like see where you are now. But I'm always concerned with the journey. So like the inflection point in the beginning, that's like, you know, what made me want to go on this path. And so maybe we could get into that a little bit of kind of everything you're doing now. Maybe start kind of at the beginning. What was kind of maybe your first realization, or wherever you want to start from, but like an early point where you're like, man, maybe either I'm lost or I'm going on this path, or this is the path somebody wanted for me. Because again, like Powerful One is the idea of kind of like dividing yourself to find yourself, and you know, essentially trying new things, breaking out of the conformity bubble. So like, what did that first experience look like for you?
So I had graduated college in the middle of a recession with a degree in finance, and finance at that time wasn't even interesting to me. So I went into apartment maintenance full time. I was doing that in college to pay for my extracurriculars. And so now here I am, I've got a 4-year degree, and I'm cleaning up shit and like fixing stuff on a college campus for like it was dubbed off-campus housing, but it was kind of like luxury on-campus housing. So I'm back in the college arena, and I'm out of college. I've got a degree. People assumed, you know how, at least when I was in college, man, I was like, whatever, dude, like, I didn't care. I was just less aware than I am now.
Sure.
So no one really knew that. And I was meeting a bunch of people. There were parties on campus all the time. I was partying a bunch, and there was this like spin cycle that I got caught up in, where like money was disappearing, time was disappearing, and the group of people that I was around, while maybe not inherently bad for me, wasn't the best for me. And there was a moment that I had, you know, in some circles, like, you know, you talk about AA or something like that, they call it a moment of clarity.
Oh, okay.
You don't need to call it something that powerful, but I remember waking up one day and being like, dude, if you keep going this direction, you will end up so far from what you could become. So what had really crafted that spiral was a breakup. And when I had this moment of clarity, I immediately was like, okay, I think some of it was motivated improperly by like fix the breakup scenario, but I wrote a contract to myself, and I wrote out maybe 6 or 7 things that I was going to accomplish by the end of the year. And it was like October. And one of them was like, if my job pays for me to go to get an MBA, I'll go do that. So I'll prepare for the GMAT. And that was a good if then, right? I didn't make it where it was like, I'm going to do this. It was a lot of if then.
Yeah.
Another one that I wrote down is I was going to start coaching soccer. And I coached soccer for 10 years. I just retired from it. Like, I just published a book on it. So, like, that obviously changed the whole trajectory for me. Another one was I was going to write a movie. So I like, in 4 months, wrote a movie. Another one was I was going to get like clock a number of miles or like a certain weight from hitting the gym. So all of a sudden I had this contract. I had a friend sign it and I signed it.
Wow.
And it was my new purpose. And what I didn't know at the time is that by just redirecting me like 4 degrees, 3 degrees, 2 degrees, I altered the whole rest of my life.
Yeah.
And what I was really doing, again, I didn't realize this then, but what I was really doing is I was filtering all of that pain. I was in a lot of emotional pain. And I was just redirecting that energy and converting it into something productive.
Yeah.
And that taught me that I could do my job and still have a full tank. Dude, I was like coming home and eventually I was like coaching soccer for like 2 hours and I would write for 6 hours. I was writing a movie for like 6 hours. And I had all these sketches and like, I mean, I went in. And after maybe 4 months of that, till the end of the year, I looked back at the year and was like, that in that 4 months, I did more than most people do in an entire year. After work. Let's make another contract. And it really started this whole wave of not just hyper production, but I was finally clear on what I could become. And I didn't know like way up there, I just knew that like I could become more.
Gotcha.
And that was the moment.
So it's interesting to me hearing that because I can relate like a big shift in my life, what I call essentially chapter 2 of the way I break down my life was a breakup involved with like moving, a bunch of stuff, like changing my name, whatever. That kind of was the same thing. So I think at first, like you were explaining, it comes with this, the first step is kind of that self-awareness. You're like, I'm here, like, you know, I just got this breakup, I'm here. So like, where do you think that self-awareness that you had comes from? Does it come from like a real inflection point, like a traumatic experience? Like where, because the common theme when I hear people talk is that it always comes from this self-awareness, but it's always hard to like kind of pinpoint where that self-awareness came from and then what to do after that self-awareness. For you, it sounds like it was kind of write out the contract, figure out these goals or whatever you're gonna call them and kind of go from there. So I'm always curious, and I'm curious your take on it. But does that make sense as a question?
It's a great question. Like you have me puzzled because it's kind of, I think to extract the root of the question is almost where does self-awareness begin?
Right, exactly. Because like, you hear about these moments of self-awareness, but it's like, well, how do I get there?
Yeah,
so people listening, like, how do they get there? You know?
How do I know?
Right.
You know, it's that is a really powerful question. The way that I like to think about self-awareness is the distinction between the dream and being awake, right? So imagine you're sleeping and you're having an awesome dream, like you're surfing this awesome wave. The only way that you know that it's not real is that you eventually at some point roll over or rock or fall out of your bed or your alarm goes off, right? There has to be some kind of like friction point, some kind of quick jarring change for you to then be like, oh, I'm actually in my bed, right? And if you look at like nightmares, I've been getting a lot of nightmares lately, and I'm not sure why, but when the nightmare reaches a critical point where it's like the most intense, that's when you wake up, right? And you're like, okay, it's not real.
Right.
But as you go through most of your world, if your pattern never changes, you don't have any way to distinguish between what's the dream and what's awake. And so what ends up creating self-awareness for people, I think, and this has been historically true for me, is some kind of friction point, some kind of jarring shock or change. And that could be something as simple as like you bump into someone on the street that you haven't seen in 5 years, and you're like, whoa, that guy has something figured out that I don't. It could be that, you know, for me, one of them was a bad car accident, right? That woke me up from the dream of like, I'm just floating through life to, holy shit, I gotta focus. Another could be that you wake up one morning and you notice that like you don't feel well, right? But the distinction between the dream and reality is only in your head. And it's such a nebulous topic to think about. Where does self-awareness begin? Because it almost is one of those definitions where you have to use the word in the definition. Like, well, you're self-aware when you're aware of self. And there's ways to wake yourself up, to willingly put in that jarring action. You could ask somebody that's very direct for feedback. That'll wake you up real quick. Right? If someone comes up to me and they're like, hey, can you help me? We might exchange a couple of different pieces of conversation, but if they say, look, I'd really love some honest feedback on these things, I'm gonna punch them. Not physically, but I'm gonna deliver a blow because that's the only way that they'll actually see, right? So I guess to summate all of this, the only distinction between being aware and not being aware is your inability to change, to shift, right? So there are plenty of things I'm not aware of, but there's a lot of things I am aware of. And awareness is a choice. If you don't have anything to immediately interrupt that pattern, you have to find something or something will interrupt that pattern. Even then, you still have a choice to be like, that was a dream or not a dream. And if that's like addiction, if that's like spiraling, if that's anger, if that's you don't know how to be in a relationship, if that's you don't understand business as well as you thought you did, there's going to be something that wakes you up. Even still, you have to make a choice to then say, I'm acknowledging that there's a shift here. Am I listening? Am I paying attention?
Yeah, man, that's a great example. I love the reality versus the dream example as well. I mean, that makes more sense because as you were talking, I was kind of gaining like clarity. I kind of had like a mini breakthrough. I was like, yeah, that makes so much sense. Like thinking about every example of my life, it's been these big kind of friction points that have caused me to have to like make a choice of that self-awareness.
So what's one? Let's assess.
So one of them was, so I'll take that breakup for example because it was the biggest. Like after that point, I was like, my identity was that I was with this girl. I felt like I'd wasted, you know, even though in hindsight I look at it and obviously it was very like beneficial for my development, who I am now. But I looked at it and I was like, man, I was doing nothing for 3 years. I was stagnant. I was all this stuff, and now I'm like, feel like I was behind. And so for me, it was like, it was a moment where I dropped out of school. I was like, you know what, I need to figure out what I like. I need to figure out what I like to do for me because my identity has been this girl for 3 years. And so I need to take a step outside of that. I knew I didn't like school at the time. I was like, I need to look inward and just try some stuff that I like. So for me, it was a huge, what seems like on a like grand scale of like traumatic experiences, it was very small, but for me, like the instance was so big in terms of like what it did for me, finding myself, finding who I was, everything that basically led to Powerful One was from that instance. So literally the worst time of my life, and that's what I always think is so cool. It's like that was the worst week of my life. And it sounds, maybe if people are listening, like everybody's got a different reality, like maybe that sounds like not a lot, it was a bad breakup. Yeah, I mean, it was a girl I was in love with, whatever. But that was the best thing that ever happened to me, which always at the time, you know, it's the worst. So it always is cool how that works, man. So that's what I was thinking about for me. That's when I started gaining that self-awareness. Another big one was our retreat. Like right after I was faced with like a big decision, a kind of a big thing that just came all at front at once. And you know what I'm talking about, but it was like job related. And it was just really eye-opening for me to just be like, wow, I never want to feel stuck. I never want to feel like I'm not always evolving and growing. Just a real moment of clarity. At the time seemed like, when I was on the phone with you, it seemed like an impossible decision, you know? So, you know, a lot of those friction points, and I could find more for sure. Yeah.
Well, let's break two of those down a little bit so that people listening can get it. You know, when you looked back at your former relationship and assessed it, you became more aware. So it's like a practice, right? So looking back on that, you have the jarring of we're not together.
Yeah.
And with a little bit of distance, you can look back on that dream state and say, well, now that I have these pieces of knowledge and this information, when I look back at that, here's what I'm gathering, right? Now I realize I was just in the same cycle.
Yeah.
it's hard to see the cycle when you're in it. So by extracting yourself, you have a jarring action, and now you're out of the cycle. You can observe the cycle.
Right.
And that created just a single practice rep of awareness.
Right.
So we'll keep the rep analogy. Same thing at the gym, right? If you have a coach that is helping you lift, they might, after a single rep, be like, your form's wrong, right? And now you're doing something different. But until someone inserts that jarring motion, you may be lifting, like, dude, there's great videos on the internet about people using equipment in weird ways, right? They're not aware that equipment needs to be used differently. And we live in a culture now where, like, you just let the guy or girl do that. Like, you don't go over and say, hey, would you like some instruction on how to do this? That would be a jarring activity to then help them build awareness. But you can't know until there's some kind of friction to your current cycle.
So do you think everybody, with that being said, has to go through their own form of it, or do you think it is a position for people to be able to help and be like, hey, look, like, you're doing this, or do you really think there's a level of, like, experience that someone has to kind of experience that on their own?
Both. It can be done alone, but it's hard to originate all of the awareness you need. Right? There's just so much that you have to incorporate. And I mean, look, I've invested tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, into coaching and groups and education that help me develop more awareness, right? And there's so many rings to this. This is why it's such a great question, because you can go down the rabbit hole forever. You could say, well, I know enough about business or money. And then as you learn more, you will naturally debunk what you learned at this level, down a level. Then you do that again and again and again and again. And this is how you drill towards expertise, right? But even with self-awareness, it takes, first you might be aware that you are, you're totally incongruent to who you want to be. That might be the first layer. You're like, wow, I'm really not treating people around me very well. Or your family's like, yeah, he's not focused. And you might hear that, and now you're a rage monster.
Right.
And you're like, wow, I really don't have it together. That might be the first layer of awareness. And the goal then is just to practice that. Why am I angry? Why do I feel this way, right? Those are all questions that will help you develop awareness, but it is a practice, and it's very hard to do on your own.
Yeah. What would you say, I mean, for you, it sounded like it was writing down, like, the contract, the goals, really, and the contract. But what would you say is, like, a next logical step for people listening? They'll be like, all right, I'm starting to become self-aware. I'm starting to question, certain things in my life. Like, what's a logical next step for people, do you think? And for you, do you think the way you did it is, like, a good way of going about it, kind of doing a contract with yourself? Or what do you think is a good next step for beyond self-awareness? Because obviously that's the first part.
That's a great question as well. The contract worked well for me because my accountability was best to myself. So you got to know, if you're best when someone else expects you to do something and you don't want to disappoint them, then write the contract with them. I was best writing it to myself. If you are at least aware that you aren't where you want to be, and you're in the middle of making shifts, there are two concrete steps that are important. One, figure out where you want to go. Doesn't need to be super duper clear. It could be like, I don't want to live in this area, or I hate my job, or I want to pursue a career in, I don't know, tie-dye t-shirts, right? It could be anything, but you need to kind of have some sense of direction. So without knowing where you are and where you want to go, it's very hard to go anywhere, right? It's like a GPS needs those two things, and that's it.
Yeah.
The second thing is you'll need to figure out if you need help. I have always been really independent and very good at converting pain into energy. So I had a lot to draw, and I was picked on a lot as a kid. Like I could find plenty of, like, really trauma to dig into and then accelerate with. And thankfully I've grown from that need. But if you are unable to throw the energy, enough energy at the problem or the shift, then you'll need help.
Yeah.
So that could be a coach, it could be a friend, peer, mentor, it could be an idol, it could be YouTube. You'll need other things to stimulate that growth.
So after you started having kind of this sense of like productivity, like with the contracts and writing new contracts, what was like the next step for you? Like, where did you go from there? So now you were, you go from college to, doing some cleaning up around the college. So now you're like more focused. You had this kind of inflection point, like you said. So what was kind of that next thing for you and becoming more clear on like basically leading to what you're doing now?
So the next several steps were, over about 6 years. I'd say phase one was being paid for what I loved. I got paid to coach soccer.
Yeah.
I was like, you can do this? This is incredible. Let me figure out how to do this more because this is possible, right? So I started really just experimenting with anything that I thought I was good enough at to earn some money.
That's awesome.
So I did some graphic design, did some logos, I did some blogging, I was just throwing like paint on the wall. I was painting all kinds of stuff so much activity happened in a period of like 3 years, right? I had out of nowhere been like, I'm gonna write a movie, and wrote a movie, and I had come back from that experience like, well, shit, if I can do that, what else can I do?
Right.
So I was just in this experimental mode. The next phase sort of coincided with the first, but I moved from maintenance to management, and then management to a new property. And in that, phase two was kind of, who can I be in a professional workspace, and what is my new identity? Because I'm no longer the maintenance guy. That had a really interesting sort of appeal to it to me, right? Blue collar, like salt of the earth, kind of like this. And now I'm in a corporate environment wearing a tie and all this stuff. So like, who is this version of me? So I had an identity shift. And phase two then sort of evolved into, now I'm a professional. What does a professional do with all these things? So I'm now a professional artist. Now I'm a professional designer. Now I'm a professional website creator. What does that bring to the table for me? And then how does that evolve?
Yeah.
Then the third phase was, what can I create on my own? So now I'm not going to someone and saying, what logo do you want? I'm saying, what do I want? And so really, if I backtrack, phase one was like experiment. Who can I be? What can I develop? Phase two was, now I'm a professional. I'll design what you want based on what I've experimented with. Phase three was, what can I design?
I love that.
And with all the confidence and all those stripes earned from a lot of battles, phase three became, well, dang, now I can create my own company. Now I can create my own logo. Now I can create my own paintings. Now I can create my own, and just insert. And because I had the awareness developed from all these other attempts, whether failed or not, most of them were fails, I could go in and say, wow, I can actually create something for me.
Yeah. So as you're discovering what this stuff you wanted to create for yourself was that something that you had kind of found once you got there? You're like, all right, I know I want to create this, or was that kind of fluid and changing? Like, when did kind of to what you're doing now, when you're like, all right, I want to create a business, going off of that, and we'll get into some of that stuff, but did you know at that point where you're now in that creating, like, I want to create this and this, did you know what that was, or did that take some time and more trial and error and figure out basically ways that you can get paid for, doing what you love, like you said with soccer?
It took some time. I remember one experience, one of my old coaches hired me to do a logo, and after 7 attempts, I could not design it correctly. And he was very kind. He still paid me for my work, but that wrecked me that I could not design what he wanted. I wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
So what that lesson taught me was that I still needed to grow. I still had a lot of room to grow. I could not deliver on the things that I wanted. And the reason that's significant is that moment existed in almost everything that I did. Some kind of indicator that I wasn't good enough. And that was a moment of self-awareness, right? This failed. It wasn't because of him. I could not take his vision and craft it. So I had to get better. When it came to working on my own ideas, what ended up really surfacing through all of these trials and errors, much like that was an anchoring experience for me. And as I had them continuously, what I realized is that was actually the most important thing I could do, fail. So when it came to my ideas, I no longer had this expectation that it would win. I actually expected it to fail first.
Wow.
And all of the experience that I had was put together in a way that allowed me to see the failure as the path rather than the wall. And when I got to my own ideas, the only difference was someone would approach me with a problem and I'd be like, well, I think I can solve that for myself. Let me invent something, let me create something.
Yeah.
But I expect that it's gonna fail first. And that changed my whole life, because now, and from then, I know that when I make something the first time, the first FrontRunner event, not great. It was not what it was now.
Yeah.
That was 4 years ago. How many people are willing to go 4 years of something failing to make something epic?
Yeah.
Right? How many people are willing to go through the nudges, the bumps and bruises when they don't know when it's going to come as a win? And those moments taught me that if I'm going to craft my own idea, I have to be willing to go through the like period of sculpting and creating that are rough. Back after a quick media break.
Yeah, quick
sponsor break.
Yeah, sponsor break. We'll throw on you saw the ad, the sponsored ad for the video. So thank you to our sponsors. But yeah, man. So I wanted to touch on what you last said, just about failure and how there's this meaning associated like with our culture with failure as a bad thing. And I always think it comes from like when I've thought about why I don't have it as much, but when I think about why failure is like glorified as such a bad thing and like the overall norm. To me, I think about, okay, in school, like when you fail a class, it's bad. Like you get in trouble, stuff like that. And then, at home, if you do something, you get in trouble. So it's like we've always been scared to put ourselves in these positions of fear based on schooling, based on, at home aspects. Is that like, what's your experience with why we have such a bad connotation with failure?
Dude, failure and the word no run really synonymously in most people's vocabulary. And, I've got a lot of people I've coached, right? Like executive coaching, alignment coaching, financial coaching, like just so many different things. And in each of those lanes, they often overlap a lot. I do a lot of work with rewriting this. It comes from schooling, it comes from education, it comes from parents, it comes from sports. Like failure as an adjective, perfectly fine. That was a failure. That move was a failure. That attempt was a failure. But as a way to describe a human being,
right,
doesn't work. Right? It breaks someone and their identity. And what's fascinating is we're almost as afraid to say no as we are afraid to fail. I had a client, I had her go out and ask ridiculous questions. Like her job, her homework this week was to ask ridiculous questions. And one of the questions, she drove up to this lady walking her dog and was like, she held up her roller skates. She's in her car. So she rolls down her window, already weird, right? This lady's walking her dog, windows down, holds up roller skates and is like, hey, can I come roller skate in your basement? And the lady's response wasn't no. The lady's response was, well, it's really crowded down there.
Wow.
Really? That's your answer?
Wow.
If someone rolls up, some kid, I was on my motorcycle and some kid was like, Papa Wheelie, I'm like, no way.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. And, we have a weird association with no like we do with failure. No is a very powerful word. It's a very important word. It's a boundary.
Yeah.
Just like failure is an opportunity for reflection and it's a boundary. Now that boundary for a lot of people is, I'm not good at this and I should stop. The boundary for me is, I'm not good at this, I should start. People find this fascinating. The first time I really got on a motorcycle, I crashed. It was like 5 years after I got my license, I crashed. My arm was skinned up, my hip was busted, the bike was busted, I was in Prague, in a foreign country, crashed a motorcycle, right? Not a bad crash, like everything was fine, but scraped up the bike, scraped up me. And I came back from that, I was like, I'm buying a motorcycle. People were like, what? What? You just crashed. What do you do? What? I think you should stop. You're obviously not good at it. And I was like, yeah, but see, this is the difference between you and I. You see failure as stop. I see failure as start. And the way that that cycle allows you to grow, if you think of business, when you get a no, if you stop then, you're out.
Yeah.
You're out of the game. If you hurt yourself in an injury and you stop playing your favorite sport, you've lost, right? If you hear a no when you go to make sales and now you think you're a bad salesman, so you quit your job, now you're a quitter. And we have such a powerful identity in failure and no that needs to be adjusted. And it takes a lot of time. I work with clients a lot to adjust this. Like, you want to be an entrepreneur? You are going to have to get comfortable with the word no, and you're going to have to get comfortable with failure daily, if not hourly, if not, is minutely a word? Minutely. You have to, and those are the areas, those are the periods of your life where you'll grow the most. Those are seeds. Failure is a seed for success.
What was the biggest, I know you touched on failures a little bit, what was the biggest failure that was the catalyst for the most growth for you?
It's really hard now looking back to extrapolate, because I've got a really healthy relationship with failure. So like, I never have been like, wow, I failed.
How about at the time maybe?
There's so, the hardest ones have been in relationships. Some of the hardest ones in business have been like the build up of like a big proposal. We spend weeks on a proposal and then it gets pushed back, or then it gets delayed, or then someone else swings in and does a better job because they're a bigger company, right? So those failures definitely stick out. I mean, I can remember being on stage, like pitching the business, and investors are like, no, not interested, never gonna work, never gonna happen. I mean, we're 6 years in. Like, if that stopped me, I would have left a long time ago. This wasn't gonna work the first 10 days, like, let alone now. Like, I'm 6 years in and people are still like, it's not gonna work. So it just has to be a commitment to work through that. And some of those failures, dude, I've been upstairs here, I've been downstairs like crying, like they're not easy. I'm not suggesting that they're not easy, but there never is going to be a point where failing is stopping, unless I choose to stop. But it's going to be separate from failure, right? It will be, I choose to stop, not because I failed, because I'm choosing to stop. I may have failed, but that's not the reason for stopping.
And I know we relate on this, and we've talked about this before, but sports, I think, is part of like our attachment with failure. It's like quitting. And I want you to talk a little bit, if you don't mind, just about the idea of like letting something go. Maybe the analogy that you gave me when we were sitting by the fire that helped me a ton to kind of get that idea. But like, when to know when to stop something because it's not productive and beneficial for you, versus the other, which is like you just failed, but you keep, to keep going. Like, if you don't mind talking about that a little bit. I know when you had spoke with that with me, it helped a ton.
Well, I have zero idea what analogy it was, but
the balloons and the anchor ones.
Oh yeah. Well, in many ways, we tend to focus on, if you do have a good relationship with failure as an athlete, or if you're in some kind of activity outside of the educational paradigm, then you often will experience like, I need to get better, so I got to practice. I'm not good, and I'll get good. So that relationship becomes ingrained, and you know that you've got to work through the failures to get to the good stuff. But when we start growing and we start expanding, we usually are encountered by option. And when we think of what's happening in our world as we're expanding, we tend to take on too much. So this is every entrepreneur's curse and gift, right? Is like juggling multiple things. And where the interesting element of relationships with failure goes is we associate stopping as a choice with failing, right? So if I'm going to choose to stop, it's not related to my failure. But for many of us, we associate I'm going to choose to stop as a failure.
Right.
And so what we were talking about in Deep Creek was, if you imagine you in the basket and you've got this set of balloons above you and a set of anchors below you. If you have a lot of anchors, you're probably stuck on the ground. You're probably not zooming, you're not flying, you're not feeling successful. If you only have balloons, you're out of control. And we've got to make selective choices on what we choose to cut. and what strings to let go of. And if you let go of a couple anchors, you'll float. But we have to observe that not as failing, but as electively and selectively coming up with the things that we choose as staying here while we go.
Right.
And this might be a relationship, right? This
Yeah.
could be like, it doesn't have to be a significant other. It could just be a friendship. Like, hey, I'm growing. You don't want to grow.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
I'll catch up with you when I swing back around. But like, I'm going anchor cut. Or it could be, you watch Netflix a bunch and you're like, I know that I can't be around TV. Notice there is no TV here.
Yeah.
So I know that if there's a TV and it's on, I'll probably get sucked in. My imagination loves to be entertained because it's so vibrant and wild that now it's focused. So I know, don't put a TV in your living room, bro. Like, I gotta let that go, cut. So there's such simplicity in thinking about where your anchors are and really being intentional about what do I need to cut so I can float.
Yeah.
People don't want to cut their TV time. They don't want to cut hanging out with their buddies and bros and ladies. Like, they don't want to cut, eating fast food. They don't want to cut the activities that don't produce for them. They don't want to cut the gym over, something else that is more blossoming. They don't want to cut the low-paying job for the big opportunity. Like, you got to cut something. But we want to do it in a sense where I'm not failing at this. I'm intentionally letting it go to create space for what's next.
Yeah. So for those things that are now the balloons, like what were some of those big anchors that you had to cut out of your life to now get to a point where don't have too much on your plate, but you're hyper focused on the stuff that you do have? So what are those kind of balloons for you now? What were some of those really hard things that you had to cut out?
Definitely some friendships.
Yeah.
I used to play soccer 2-3 nights a week. I can't justify that in who I want to become, right? The person I want to become requires a bit more than, a couple of nights a week playing soccer. It's my favorite game, so I try to get a game in a week, but 3-4 nights a week, while it was great for fitness, it's also like prep the food, eat, drive, play, drive home, shower, and a 10 o'clock night game, I'm in bed at 1 a.m. after eating. So, right, it's like a 4-hour event.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of time. So that was one, that was really hard. Sometimes, I think about like the trips to the movie, the like vacations, all those things I've slimmed down. I'm intentional about them, but they're slimmer. They're less spontaneous.
Gotcha.
A lot of my buddies will go out Thursday, Friday, Saturday, like to brunch on Sunday, right? Like very cavalier throughout the weekend. And, I don't want to say I work all hours of the day, but I'm very clear on where I want to go. And that was some anchor that I had to cut. Was like, here's the math I come back to. If I work, let's say 10 hours between Saturday and Sunday, that's 10 hours times 52 weeks. That's 520 hours. When you work an average of 40 hours a week, I've now got 10 extra weeks, almost 15 extra weeks. Bro, I'm zooming by you.
Yeah.
So even just with my weekends, I'm putting in an extra like quarter of the year. Like, we're talking about weeks and weeks and weeks, right?
Yeah.
That's how you change your life. So those are anchors that had to be cut.
Yeah.
And there are many. I've cut fast food. I've cut eating unhealthy. I've cut a bunch of salt. I've cut a lot of coffee. I've cut, buying things that don't serve me. I've cut owning a bunch of stuff. It's very minimal in here.
Yeah.
I've cut buying cheap things. I buy things that I know I can hold and have for 10 years. So all of those things were anchors that in identity needed to shift, in relationship to failure and no needed to shift, and then in relationship to who I want to become, didn't fit in the puzzle.
Yeah. It's interesting, and I want people listening to be to understand when you say like you're working, like Aaron loves what he does for work. So when he says he's working, like that's the stuff that he's passionate about and he's doing. So it's not. There's a lot of people who would be like, oh, well that sucks, but it's like you're passionate about it. So talk a little bit more about the stuff that you're really passionate about that you do, because I know for you work, when I be like, bro, how's it going? You're like, man, I'm living the dream. Blessed. So talk a little bit more about that aspect of your work and your life in general.
Yeah, most people are really like confused when they like really like look underneath the hood. I have turned everything I love into businesses. And there's some pros and cons to that.
Sure.
But like the core of it is I enjoy teaching people and helping them grow. So I've got a business called Ortus Academy that works on the financial education space, because that's just abysmal in a lot of ways. Most people don't and never have learned about money. So we help people evolve their relationship with money, adults and kids. And that birthed out of like, dude, wouldn't it be cool if we could go make change, make impact, and have a business?
Yeah.
Soccer coaching evolved out of that one opportunity like 10 years ago. And from that came, I'm going to write a book about this. I'm going to write a book about my experience. So I'll publish that in March. Then I've got FrontRunner, which came from, I'm hanging out with a bunch of entrepreneurs. I'm evolving. They're not evolving. Let me help them evolve. Or let me be a part of their evolution. If nothing else, let's all evolve together.
Yeah.
And I want to do that, like, rather than do that from a laptop or rather than do that in a cafe, let's book an amazing venue and like get away for a weekend and do awesome, let's like rent a boat and like, you know, do all this cool stuff. Let's just weave that in together. Like, I would do that for me, let alone for other people. So let's just weave it together.
Yeah.
Then coaching, like executive coaching and entrepreneurship coaching, all that has come from, you know, people being like, hey, can you help me? Like, well, absolutely I can help you, but you know, if we have a 1 hour phone call and you want like somebody subscribed, we need a deeper relationship. Like, you want me to be invested in you and all that, we got to have a mutual investment. So that really just came from, hey, I've been through this, I can probably navigate you around all of this nonsense tactically, and then I can help you evolve internally so that you grow in both areas. And I mean, same with graphics. And I sold one of the paintings I sold. Like, I was just doodling at Christmas, posted online, and someone was like, "Can I buy that?" And that evolved into an entire. I think I did a 7-piece series of digital art that I sold on Etsy. And then somebody saw that and was like, "Dude, can you do a custom painting for me?" Like, it has all been because I'm not afraid to fail. I'm not afraid to look like an idiot or like deal with criticism. And these things that I love, I just chose to go through long enough to learn how to make a business out of them.
Yeah.
And now I get to do the things I love as my businesses. And dude, I'm so incredibly lucky and grateful to wake up and be like, well, what am I going to do today? Well, I'm going to build the things I care about that impact others, that make others better, that show them how to do something in life that I was lucky enough to stumble on.
Yeah.
And that's my day. Every day.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
That's incredible. What excites you the most just about everything you're doing now, just everything in general in your life right now, whether it's businesses, just lifestyle, like what's really exciting to you looking forward in your present? You know, what excites you, what gets you energy, and stuff like that?
So I'm about 5 years into being an entrepreneur. Five and a half-ish. And what is exciting is like, even as I get these like swift kicks in the nuts and punches in the face and like swipes on the jugular, at only 5.5 years, so much of my life has changed. It's incredible.
Yeah.
And I mean, I can look at any category: income, fitness, health, capability. Like, the things that would have taken me hours to do, I can do in minutes.
Yeah.
And I'm only 5 years in, and so I'm really excited about, you know, how much I can help another person faster. I'm excited about how much I can teach another person more efficiently. I'm excited about how I can build a business with better trajectory, having the experiences that I have and avoiding the pitfalls. And, you know, it's a snowball effect.
Yeah.
Like, by the time you get to the bottom of the mountain, like, you got a gigantic thing, but you've got to be willing to kind of roll a lot.
Yeah.
And it's really awesome to have a purpose statement very clearly, and know this is the direction I want to go. And there's like an infinite number of possibilities as I evolve through that. And I mean, the great part about entrepreneurship is like, I could get a phone call tomorrow that changes everything.
Yeah.
Everything. Like, I can meet someone out on the street that changes everything. Like, you have to think that way. Optimism is an actual stratagem in entrepreneurship, and there's not many places that encourage that.
Yeah.
But I'm excited that all of the things that I'm building not only like force me to stay in that mode, but I get to share that with other people.
Yeah.
And allow them to see, like, dude, you're one step away. The thing is, you don't know which one step it is. Come on, let's go. And getting people to think that and feel that is really invigorating.
Yeah, man, I love that. Where can people find you if they want to check you out, check out your businesses, your companies, just check you out as a person?
AaronVelky.com. They can find me on Instagram at Aaron Velky, Twitter at Aaron Velky, like pretty much all that. I got lucky that no one else had my name. Yeah.
I'm DMing some people with the name Tommy Parker, like, yo, give me that. But
hello.
That's great.
That's a great place to start, and then from that website you can get to the movements, Ortus Academy, to FrontRunner, to all that. You can send me an email from that. So find me, contact me, say hello. Like, I would love to support anybody, whether that's learning about money through Ortus, whether it's evolving in FrontRunner, whether it's coaching through just me. If you want the book, it's on Amazon. Like, there's lots of ways to get to me. So find me, say hello, and I'm happy to help.
Yeah, guys, Aaron's had a huge impact on my life already. I mean, it's crazy to think, like, a lot of the people I've known my whole life, and I've known you for a month now, and you've forever changed my whole life until this point. So I just want to thank you for that, and thank you for being a part of this, man. And last thing before we head out, I always end with this, but if you could give the listeners just one kind of core piece of advice, maybe we have mentioned it, maybe we haven't, just to kind of stick with them to wrap up this amazing podcast, what would that be?
The one-liner, huh? If you are not happy where you are, or don't feel like you're maximized, or don't feel like you're growing, then I would say do this. Write a letter to yourself as if you're your future looking at your now. And write it and give yourself permission to change, to let go, to adapt. Whatever it is that you're feeling internally, write the letter to yourself and just say, like, hey Aaron, like, I know you're nervous about changing. I know you're nervous about letting go. I know you're nervous about, taking a big step or investing that money into a new program, but it's all going to work out. And I want you to know that it's safe, that you're going to grow from this. It's going to be valuable. And that letter will often be a great trigger point. Remember we talked about self-awareness, like that you need something to create some friction to make another shift.
I love that, man. That goes along really well with the tone of the podcast.
Bring it all the way back.
I know,
to
right?
the
It's awesome, man. Well, thank you, man. Go check out Aaron, guys. Check out his book, Let Her Play. Check him out on social media. Check out his websites, everything like that. Thank you, brother.
Dude,
appreciate it, man.
Appreciate you coming.
Awesome.
Thank you.
We out.